All right, it is time for our first panel of the day. This panel is entitled CISO Perspective on AI, and it will be moderated by Mark Ostrowski from Checkpoint, and the panelists will be introducing themselves once they get onto the stage.
Hi, good morning. First, I'll introduce myself, and then I'll have the rest of the panelists do their own intros as well. My name is Mark Ostrowski. I head up the engineering team for Checkpoint Software here on the East Coast. Have been doing so for about 17 years. Over the course of those 17 years, I've seen a big change relative to how we as a security company deploy as well as manage security IOCs and just general awareness of what's going on out there in the security space. And certainly artificial intelligence and machine learning will be a big piece of that. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk a little bit about what these the great panelists here to share relative to this space. So I guess before I kind of hand it off to do quick introductions, why now? Why is artificial intelligence right now becoming or has become so frequently talked about? And I think in the security space, it's really three main things that we as a company have recognized of sort of why this is becoming more and more a poignant topic. The first thing is an abundance of storage. We process about 2 billion unique requests a day from our customer base. So you can imagine 2 billion pieces of information that we're having to be able to process and storage over a long period of time. And only the last maybe 4 to 5 years, that's become a scenario where we're actually able to consume and to be able to store those large amounts of data. And then, of course, the two other components are compute and then math, right? So as these things are progressing, the applicability of artificial intelligence in our space, we're getting more and more fine-tuned. So I think that's really why we are here today, is to kind of talk about that a little bit. So I'm going to pass off to Ravi, Gary, and Erin, Michelle, if you guys could do some quick introductions.
Sure, thanks, Mark. Ravi Mani with IBM. I'm a distinguished engineer and a CISO for the IBM Watson AI platform. Have been working on the security space for quite a while, and I used to manage the cloud deployments and SOC, and now I'm concentrating on just the AI platform where all our IBM Watson AI services, both hybrid cloud model, public cloud, and on-prem, which we call it IBM Cloud Private, runs on our platform. And mainly trying to be compliant as well. We all know compliance is not equal to security, but to make it compliant across the board in various industries is my responsibility. Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, this is on. My name's Gary Owen. I guess started my security career at Citigroup. At the time, they didn't have much of a program, and we kind of built it from scratch, myself and lots of other folks. Moved on to Goldman Sachs, who had I would say, a much more mature, and even before AI was called AI, a sort of advanced machine learning, thinking about the types of opportunities that data gave us when the compute power and storage really weren't there to exploit it. And my most recent stop was at Time Warner, where I was the global CISO for the organization. Very big difference from banking to media, where your technical foundation is very different than in the unregulated space than in the regulated space. So I hope I bring a few different opinions to the panel.
I'm Erin Perri. I'm the CISO at Multiplan. I've been in IT for well over 20 years. Most of that has been in security, in the finance and the healthcare space. And yes, the healthcare view is very different from the finance view, so I'm happy to talk about that as well. I'm in charge of information security, enterprise risk management, and largely privacy as well.
Okay, great. So I just kind of kick this off here. We'll kind of ask a very general question, right? I think we all can agree that AI isn't magic necessarily, right? It's just not going to solve all of our problems immediately. So where do you guys see the best applications for AI in all these different spaces you guys just referenced?
All right, let me go first. So about 5-6 years ago, we were thinking, of course, speech-to-text, visual recognition, et cetera, were there from an AI perspective deployed both machine learning and deep learning has been coming up to speed. So we were thinking, how can we leverage that machine learning algorithms and the deep learning algorithms for cybersecurity? So that was embedded into the IBM research here in Yorktown Heights, and several other IBM research entities around the world contributed to it. So we worked on it, and we had the Watson learn the language of cybersecurity. So that's our first entry into AI. After achieving that, we embedded the Watson for cybersecurity into our SIEM product called QRadar, and you can activate the Watson for cybersecurity. So the area, Mark, is the SOC, Security Operations Center, where our analysts don't have enough time, don't have enough knowledge because the unstructured data are not being used effectively. So to address the time, skill, as well as the threat landscape increasing, we developed and deployed the AI models for the Security Operations Center. So that was our first entry, I would say, into the quote-unquote AI entry into the cybersecurity space.
Right.
I would think of it more as your first layer of triage used to be a filter, some simple filter. Regardless if it's a SOC issue, whether it's a compliance issue, whether it's human behavior, it doesn't have to be anything necessarily malicious, but what is anomalous? And I see AI, and again, I think AI is coming out of crawling and sort of walking, and maybe not even walking yet. But proper use of AI, as well as other filtering, other things, you can take your analysts, your staff, your other machines, other capabilities, and target them much better. I'm not sure I'm ready to take AI as a decision matrix at the very end of a lot of activity. It really depends on how critical it is. But my first take is we already have too much information. We used to fight for getting indicators of compromise. We used to fight for getting the types of things that we could then search for. Now we have too much of it. So is AI the engine that helps us shrink that down to digestible chunks that we can actually action and still have analysts, still have people on the inside make decisions on what it's telling us? And I think that one of the most important things, which was mentioned a couple times this morning, is not assuming that AI and the models that are coming from AI-driven systems are accurate to begin with. It's a challenge at the very beginning, because they say the husky dog is a great example where you can tune something and think it's great and realize that you've tuned off all the wrong things, and you're going to close your eyes and say, it's right, I must be perfect because it's telling me. So I would think of it as a great filter to start with.
And Michelle?
So from a CISO's perspective, I'm responsible both from, of course, using AI in my own program, which we'll talk about, but also making sure that the AI programs around the company are done in a way that's compliant and in line with data privacy legislation and everything that we've agreed to with our clients. So I have two perspectives. One, making sure whatever we're working on is being happening in a compliant and contractually correct way, but then also from my program. And for my program, I've integrated it, obviously the threat hunting aspect, which I work with my vendors heavily to make sure is happening correctly, also with some of the SOC piece for sure. And one of my latest use cases that's fairly interesting, which because it was sort of a blind spot before, is insider threat. So I'm now doing some analysis on insider threat using peer group analysis with AI, and actually that's proven to be very interesting. But I echo your points. It's a data point. It's not the final decider.
All right, Michelle, you mentioned on our pre-call and kind of discussing this that you guys are using AI to prioritize alerts. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So what we have is, the way we've been using it is, obviously, when you start seeing certain trends that appear to be someone executing against the kill chain, those particular threats are escalated in my environment and presented to my analyst sooner than a lot of the noise that you see in the environment.
Great. I'll share a quick little completely unrelated AI story to some aspects, but it's interesting, and we'll kind of get to the whole sort of privacy concerns and regulatory aspects of that. But I've got two little kids, and my son wanted a 7x7 Rubik's Cube for obvious reasons. He had graduated from the smaller one, And we have an Alexa in our house, like probably most of you folks have it up today. And of course, AI is a big part of that platform, right? Speech recognition and all different things that Amazon is kind of listening in on us, so to speak. So my son, just out of complete innocence, asked, "Hey, where can I find a 7x7 Rubik's Cube?" And Alexa responded back, "This is just prior to Easter weekend. Oh, you have one on order, and it'll be here on Friday." So needless to say, the Easter Bunny was sort of prematurely killed off. Yeah. So it's interesting how even a simple story like that kind of shows, how artificial intelligence and speech recognition, all these things are really changing our lives. So, that's one, from my perspective. My wife looked at me and she's like, "Well, what else does this thing know about us?" And I'm like, "Pretty much everything." So I guess from a regulatory perspective and from a privacy perspective, especially in the healthcare area, it's going to be a huge concern. Maybe we can talk a little bit about regulatory problems or concerns, as well as the privacy aspects, and we'll work our way this way.
Okay. Right.
Or this way. Go ahead.
Let me go ahead.
Yeah.
So thinking about your story on Alexa, we know Microsoft released the Taybot, right? A couple of years now, 4 years ago. So what happened behind the scenes was the model poisoning app, where it was trained perfectly with the ground truth data, released it to the field, but the field accepted the Twitter feeds. So personal opinions, whatever that came out of Twitter has been poisoning the model that has been created in Taybot. So quickly they have to turn it off. So the key point here is not only we concentrate on the ground truth data that's for AI to be trained, but also how do we secure the model? Once it's developed, how do we secure the model? And then the third aspect is the operational security. Even though it's an AI platform, all our security hygiene that we do for non-AI comes into the operational security model, as well as the data security. So I will talk about the model security in a minute, but let me give it to Perri or Erin.
Oh, thank you. So obviously healthcare is an interesting space because it's a strange mix between things that are really rather old, but then there's this new focus on making healthcare, way more usable for the patient. So you're seeing this. You're dealing with incredibly old systems and old mindsets, but really new problems. So what we're seeing happening a lot, and again, it's in my environment, it's B2B, not B2C. So what we're dealing with is a lot of insurers coming to us saying, we don't want you using any of our patient data, even in its masked form, for any services other than what we've asked you to do. And this is a challenge, because what we've been trying to do, of course, is use this data to provide better services, but also to secure the data as well. So what we've been trying to do, something I've been leading for about the past 2 years, is every time we get a large contract, I ensure at the very least we carve out space for us to be able to use the data, ideally in the most pure form possible. The previous speaker spoke about if the data is not real, the models aren't spectacular, to be able to protect the patients. I try to do better than that, of course. I try to make it so that we can use the entire data set, and I go to great lengths to make the insurers feel comfortable that what we're doing with it is something they're going to feel comfortable with. But at the very least, I've been doing the carve out for the security space. So it's very mechanical, it's very manual, it's been contract by contract, but in the healthcare space, that's the reality we're dealing with.
I think, in my experience, I would be AI has a terrific opportunity to mine data in a way that you would not normally be able to, just human power, CPU power, data storage, so on and so forth. When it comes to privacy and or sensitivity of data, especially in healthcare, and I did a lot of user behavior, Goldman's very particularly careful about how people use their systems and move data and so forth. But by using AI and tuning it, the outcome might be something you don't expect, which could be very privacy-centric, very concerning in terms of what types of information comes out of the activity. And the example I'll use is an individual is trying to pull user behavior activity to identify those who were trying to have a child and having difficulty, because his family was having that example, which he had the right intent. But by doing that analysis, of course, what comes out? A lot of sensitive privacy-related information. So my boss challenged me to say, well, why did you let him do that? Why was that allowed to be done in the system? And AI or any really strong data analytics platform can allow that to happen. And trying to prevent it's very difficult, because I could think of all kinds of rules that would prevent that particular thing, but you could invert your query or the AI device to find information that's very similar. So these are a lot of challenges in terms of not just the platform and not just the data, but I would say derivative outcomes of really good intention. So those types of things you have to keep in mind as you think about a data ethics program or an AI management usage program that you might not have upfront. And especially in healthcare, and where of course all the data is so fundamentally sensitive. But this was like web traffic data for me, or it was simple, door usage and simple stuff that you would not think would be that sensitive.
So I work across industry. I also work with healthcare industry. As Erin pointed out, the main thing that we are dealing with, even before creating a service, is the data use policy. What is how can we use the data? Now, I'm not even going to the HIPAA-related PI, SPI, personal data. I'm just talking about an image of one of you here that's published somewhere, and it gets into as a pipeline, as the ground truth data for a visual recognition. That becomes a problem from a legality perspective because of a personal, even though it's a published image with no copyright on it, but it cannot be used for training purposes. We worked very closely with the European Union. Earlier this month, European Union published the data policy. They call it Ethics for AI, Trustworthy AI. So that particular policy we expect to be adopted globally. So one of the main things of that policy is the data use. How do we make sure the data that is being carved out is being used appropriately, legally, and also it's not shared between, the learnings are not shared from customer A to customer B, because the data that's coming from a set of customer is their IP, 100-year-old IP in many cases, right? And data is their IP. So whatever learnings that the AI built into it has to be staying within that domain and not used for competition or other learning models.
Great. Michelle, you seem to be nodding your head a lot.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I think that's, when I mentioned that I have to go to great lengths to make the insurers feel comfortable, I'm only going to be using their data in a way that they feel comfortable with. One of those things, of course, is not selling the output of the data and sharing it with third parties in an inappropriate way. And I think that has gone really far in the conversations, that making people feel comfortable. Yes, I'm using this, I'm using your data to protect you. I'm using your data to, stop problems in the industry like fraud, waste, and abuse. And I think once you have that open dialogue back and forth, especially with the privacy officers, you're able to get to a pretty good middle ground. I'm hoping, we have a more, a less manual way to do it going forward, but as of right now, it's a lot of conversations, one-off conversations.
I'll add one more thing. You raise an interesting point that probably most CISOs or compliance teams don't think much about, which is, where is AI or advanced analytics being used across your industry or company especially? And is there a compliance program for that? Is there any knowledge of how those tools are being used and potentially misused? As a CISO, you have some oversight, some requirement to ensure that security is there, but we're not the ethics police. And I'm not sure the compliance team would be, and some others. But where does that responsibility really lie? And who on the security team should have some ownership, and who else along the chain of your company should be overseeing some of this activity? And some of the comments before is, what are the outcomes of misuse? Do you let the market drive it? And I wouldn't want to be the CISO of a company that's misusing inadvertently client data, using AI, and creating a risk to the company, because ultimately the CISO has a piece of it.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah. I mean, I think we can most likely all agree that, we'll get better and better at making these decisions with the more and more data that we have, right? But there's definitely this concept of bad data equals bad AI, right? And I think, Gary, that's kind of where you're getting to. Ravi, we quickly talked about this morning a little bit about some of the missing skill sets that could be out there, or not necessarily missing, but maybe just not enough of the skill sets available. You want to talk a little bit about how you see sort of just the industry in general and how folks are coming into it, and how artificial intelligence is augmenting that?
Yeah, so skills is a major issue for cybersecurity. Every time I look at the numbers, it keeps on increasing. The last time I looked at it was like 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs in 2021, which is not too far away. And tomorrow, if I look at it, it will be more than that. So one of the things that IBM is doing with Ginny, our CEO, coined the phrase new collar jobs, where we know that the skills shortage is going to be on cybersecurity and other areas such as software development. So with this new collar job program, we are embedding the STEM program as well as people who are in the community college, et cetera. We bring them through the on-the-job training as apprentices and give them the needed skills to enhance their current skills that will be used in the future. So that's an initiative that we are betting positively on to solve the skills shortage.
Yeah. Do you want to
Go for it.
Okay. I think at least when it comes to, I would say, frontline, line one security analysts and the sharp edge of the spear, sort of to protect your industry, the tools are lacking. It's the ability to have the tools where they can learn from it, where it's less and less of a black box or a partial picture of what's going on. So we have lots of young, really smart, capable people coming out of university who are ready to learn. And sort of the technology is under wraps to some degree when they think about becoming an analyst. Either you're stuck in the dark ages where you're looking across log files and doing basic analysis, or you have this super tool which they want to get to understand much better, but is somewhat shrouded in secrecy because of IP reasons, because of the dark trades. A potentially great tool, but when it was first presented to me, I got to teach my people to fish. I don't want just outcome to be fed to them, then they do a final search and check a box or not. And they've got to learn how the tools work, what drives that tool, and I want them to be able to modify it over time. And so when it comes to education and bringing people up, you have two ends of that spectrum. You have people who are really simple analysts and going to look at log files and do the analysis. And then you have these great tools that maybe don't give the hands-on activity for them to come up to speed as fast.
That's an interesting point. So, generically speaking, yes, we have a shortage in the cybersecurity space for experts. The way I've sort of managed it with my team is I've taken people who are super talented, recent graduates, and given them the opportunity to be part of building a program and a lot of ownership, and that's worked really well. I also employ some serious pros that help train that team, but also make sure that you have true experts operating in the environment. From a tools perspective, that's an interesting point. What I've done is I have a component that's AI that's very much in-house, and I have one person who is focused on creating models internally for me, for my program. But for the most part, I've actually partnered with my vendors who are experts in the AI space to make sure my program has that maturity, because I can't actually staff a team of data scientists and so on and so forth to do that. So I've leaned on my vendors heavily for that. But I do agree that the tools themselves are a bit of a black box sometimes. It can be challenging.
Great. Talking a little bit about, diving directly sort of into the cyber threat prevention kind of topic. Talk a little bit about that. And like last year, some just very, very, very high level or statistics from Checkpoint's perspective is that we're relying around somewhere between 13, this is last year in 2018, somewhere around 13 to 16% of what we're providing to our customer base that prevents attacks is actually being 100% driven by AI. So relatively still a small percentage. And the reason why that percentage, by the way, is growing, quarter to quarter to quarter. But obviously, one of the biggest concerns is false positive rates, right? So as soon as you sort of turn your blind eye and you let the algorithms do their work, then you obviously have to be accountable, right, for what product we're delivering, right? So, which means if you do the reverse math on that, 80% of the stuff that we're blocking are what we call basic attacks, right? Things that we're able to identify. So, I'd love to hear your guys' perspective relative to, how do you see AI in your fields and in your organizations blocking traditional things, or do you see them? You're really starting to take hold and providing more and more coverage, or perhaps where there was a gap.
Okay. Who wants to start?
All right, let me go there. So I was talking about the 3 phases of the AI. The first phase being the data security phase from a security perspective, where we need to make sure the data is secure, the ground truth data is secure. Now I want to talk a little bit about the model security. As given an example about the Taybot being model poisoned, there are several attacks that are happening using fast gradient method, for example. So how do we secure the model? We have worked on a research program, and now a tool called ART is been an open source entity that we have deployed it, where you can go in and put in an image, for example. We have a simple demo there. A mouse trap with 100% confidence level on the it's a mouse trap, it will say it. With the slider, you can just go in and say, fast gradient method to a low, the mouse trap becomes a eraser. So that's how easy it is to fake an AI model. It's called model poisoning. So this robustness toolkit, we also give the attack vectors, what can go wrong, as well as how do you defend against those attack vectors. So beneath that attacks, the defense mechanism, you can play with it and see, what the confidence level is. With some perturbation, bring back the confidence level high to a mouse trap is one of the areas that we are working on. And we would love to, for people to go in and provide, it's an open source, provide feedback on it as well as contribute to it so that we can make the models more effective from the AI perspective.
From my perspective, CISO's challenge all the time is access to accurate and I won't say all, but a relatively full picture of the data you need or you want to have. And that's like climbing a mountain. It's very difficult to get access to the data that you really want to have, especially for a large enterprise where you might have hundreds of firewalls and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of staff. So getting that information first is challenging on its own. Then moving it into through some AI platform and getting value out of that AI platform is a real challenge as well. So I would be as worried about, in terms of SOC and security, not just false positives, but false negatives, lots of false negatives, and the tuning of the model with incomplete pictures of your data and what it means to you as a user is a tremendous challenge. So like I said earlier, I think AI as a filtering mechanism, what it can do for us is take that concentric circle model and bring it closer to the center. But you have to be really careful with what is it telling you and how comfortable and confident are you that the information you're getting is accurate and not skewing you in some false sense of security, which happens all the time with lots of the new widget tool on the street now is AI. A year and a half ago it was robotics. 3 years ago it was SIEM. 3 years before it was something else. So don't lull yourself into sleep that suddenly this is going to be this nirvana of capability. You have to really inch your way into it. So again, I like the model of concentric circles. You're moving yourself closer to the challenge, But the center is really difficult. So don't trick yourself.
Yeah, so I built the program for the company I work for now from scratch, and I went from being blind and not being able to see anything to having a shocking amount of noise in my environment as I was ramping up tools and data sets and so forth. And then now I'm at the point where I'm able to fine tune and quiet it a little bit. And I think the way AI has helped me with that, I would think, is all my endpoints. I have a vendor who does excellent threat hunting and threat detection, which cuts through some of the noise. I have sort of supervised learning on the SOC automation piece, so it's sort of AI light. And then again, with the insider threat, sort of executing against the kill chain, I think that has cut through some noise as well, because a lot of the times it's a little tough to train for insider behavior in a way that looks anomalous and different from the rest, and we do that with peer groups and Markov graphs and things like that, which are pretty exciting. But I do agree, I couldn't do any of this until I had the right data onboarded and feeding these tools correctly, and I felt reasonably good that the data itself was correct, or you can't do this.
Yeah, the UBA is real, right? Now, user behavior analytics. Erin mentioned insider threat. That's one of our key aspects that we continuously, ingrain on, because even though we have, private keys and other things, many times we do the scan in our customer environment, we see the keys and the secrets being in a box folder. So anybody could go take the key and do anything with it. So insider threat is a known area, and UBA helps us with identifying anomaly patterns. Is that person downloading a data at 2 a.m. in the morning, which is not relevant to that person, even though he could be our greatest admin? How to stop that behavior when detected is one of the key things that we are working on as well.
Yeah.
All right, great. We'll wrap this up with one final question. Erin, Michelle, you sort of touched upon this quickly in your last response, but maybe we can sort of close out the session talking a little bit. If you had budget dollars and you were building a security program, how much would you put towards AI? Where would it be prioritized relative to that security program? And this is how we start with you, because Erin, Michelle, you just started, but maybe Gary, if you want to start us off with our closing remarks, and how would you prioritize budget dollars and so forth, putting AI into a cybersecurity program?
I have to be careful at this conference.
Got to end with a good one, Gary.
No,
right?
it's a hedge. It really is a hedge. You have to invest in AI for lots of different reasons, and I just be careful. Look before you leap is a classic. To think about what you're going to invest in, what's going to come out of it, and in your priority stack, depending how mature your program is the most important thing compliance? What pressure are you under? Is your most important thing your attack surface area? Is it the threats themselves? Is it detecting threats on the inside? Where do you want to apply AI should determine how much you're willing to invest and where it is on your list of top priorities. And first, it can't be number 8 every year. It can't be just under the line. But at the same time, it probably shouldn't be number 1 unless there's something specific that you're trying to use it against. And I'll use the banking example as a good one. So if you've got a significant M&A threat and you think that you are really under attack and it's way above your hygiene level, AI could be a great tool for it. It could be a great way to look at the users, the individuals, the activity that goes on. But it's not a security blanket you're just going to roll out and not have any challenges with. And the other, I would say, this was very true in the security event management space or some of the earlier, I would say, waves of important tools. Never underestimate the actual cost of deploying, engineering, getting value out of an AI example. So it's whatever you think you're going to spend 3 times as much. You're going to spend it on people, on process change, on data collection, on model tuning, model protection, and so forth. So when you're doing a budget, when you're thinking about these things, don't underestimate the challenge of any deployment, especially in a large enterprise.
I agree entirely, and it really depends on your program. And again, it's your threats. What are you really facing? Are these serious APTs, or are they something like a lot noisier and a lot lighter weight? I wouldn't make it your first dollars that you spend. I think there's some basics you can do for your program, and make sure you're doing those right, and they don't cost too much money, and they get you very far in the equation. And then once you have the maturity, once you have data and you feel good about it, then I would feel comfortable investing in the space. And again, it is very expensive when you start factoring in resources and so on. I will say that if it's the space you're interested in and you want to get into it and you want to sort of dip your toe in, you can partner with certain tools, certain vendors who are doing this in-house and try to garner some kind of knock-off value from what they're doing in your environment. So there is a way you can dip your toe in, I think, if you're not ready to go full force with it yet.
All right, so I would be a little biased because I'm from Watson Group. So 3 things I want to base my judgment on, right? One is we talked about skills. How many of you believe if you have unlimited budget, you can get the right skill in place today and fulfill your open job openings on the security space? Unlimited budget. There is a skill shortage, and it's going to exponentially go up in the next couple of years. As I said, 3.5 million is what analysts said for 2021. And you turn around, and there is no way we are going to get the right skills in place, even if we have unlimited budget. And the second one is the threat landscape. We know as a security professional, the threats are happening, irrespective of AI or not. The threat landscape is increasing. And the third one is speed. Addressing the amount of, there is a skill shortage. Everybody in the panel said, I got one person who's knowledgeable about the tools, and they will train the second person, et cetera. And the threat is high, and the speed to act. What's happening in the SOC world is, you can relate to your SOC. Analysts are picking and choosing which threat should be worked on with their own intuition. Rest of the thing, it could be false positive. I will get to it by end of the week, because they couldn't pretty much handle the amount of, we handle 35 billion events a day for 70 plus SOC that IBM has deployed for our global customers. So no way it's going to be a manual thing. So I would argue automation is key. So your budget should be put into automation so that there is less manual intervention, identifying things, and use machine learning, deep learning as models as an AI budget to enhance your automation so that these 3 things and the threat vectors that are going to increase can be addressed in a more effective way. So that's my view.
That's great. Well, Erin, Michelle, Gary, Robbie, thanks so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you.
For questions, if you don't mind. Does anyone in the audience? Okay.
So hi, I'm Patrick Gall, the Executive Director of the National Technology Security Coalition. A couple of weeks ago, I was here in New York with Kim Watson from APL at Johns Hopkins, and she was talking about the people issue that you just addressed. And what she said was, it's not a people problem, it's an automation problem, that we have to adopt an automation philosophy in order to get past this shortage of skills. How do you see that rolling out? I mean, how do we get to an automation philosophy so that chief information security officers are viewing that as the way forward?
I'll take it. I think CISOs fall into like 3 or 4 categories, and the lowest being more of an analyst kind of coming out of the tech environment. The second one being understanding what a security program looks like and kind of starting to build it. And the third being more executive presence, building out a complete program. And the fourth is sort of board level executive business management. I think CISOs are moving up that chain. I think businesses are driving that way for that exact reason, is that budgets keep getting bigger, staffs keep getting bigger. There are more technical solutions that can be deployed. And if you're not automating the simple stuff, you're gonna drown. You're gonna simplify your program to focusing on all kinds of threats when you really need to be on the top 10%, and you should be pushing. To me, I think A more mature program is pushing more of what used to be called security activity to the operations team. And then the security team is overseeing those activities from an analytics perspective. That's where AI can come in. I said, if you can detect stupid, bad activity, silly activity, you'll be able to find malicious. And I think if you don't put some automation around these activities, you're never going to move up that chain. You're never going to be able to execute effectively. But it's a lot of challenge. It's data, it's people, it's the scope. Who's driving you? Are you being driven by your regulators and your management and your board that may not be driving you in the way you want to go? Or is it the CISO and their staff's inability to, I think, see the future, see that automation makes more sense, and pushing some of the lower value activity down the chain and being willing to kind of turn your head and say, you know what? I'm going to take that 1 in a million chance that something bad's going to happen because I'm going to focus on the things that are 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000.
The next question.
Thank you. This is for Mr. Ravi.
Sure.
The question is regarding the model poisoning. So I'm very interested. How do you prevent that? How do you secure that? Guarantee the integrity of the model, right? And also, I missed the name of the open source tool.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's ART. If you Google ART, Adversarial Robustness Toolkit. So it's on mybluemix.net. It's an open source. You can Google it and you will see it. You mentioned the word guarantee. I'm sorry, there is no way we can guarantee a model poisoning. We can simulate attacks, right? We can simulate attacks the way we know it. That's happening by means of all these events that Mark talked about and the panel talked about. And then the prevention mechanism, there are a lot of prevention mechanism that is coming out of academia that's been inserted into the ART, and as well as research around the globe. That's how we are handling that. Going back to your question, I have a comment. That's a very good question about automation. How do we spend the dollars in the right amount because the dollars are all finite dollars and automated? One of the things that I have seen in my area of oversight is as simple as the human aspect that Gary mentioned, as simple as providing the least privilege access to an entity, human or a system, and also shared ID management. Those are the two areas that we would think it's a common security hygiene, but not adopted properly because we live in a world of SREs where the developers want access to anything and everything and constant access, no ports blocked because I want to deploy quickly. I deploy every, my sprint is every week to every 3 weeks. You cannot stop me type of thing. So there are tools that we deployed in terms of automation for privilege ID management as well as the shared ID management because those items came out of my threat model that I did and prioritized it to say where would be my big bang for the buck.
Hi, so this question is for the group in general. So when you're doing these analytics and transformation problems, a lot of what we see is that you have to bring data scientists in to start looking at the data and make kind of assessments to even steer where you're going to go with this. But the other challenge we see is that this is a long horizon problem to really solve and integrate. And in the private world, it's speed to capability, and more times, more dollars. So how do you justify going to the board and saying, this might take quite a while and you might not see results immediately, and so let's invest in this trickle capability to bring it in without just quashing the program outright?
Very good question.
Giving it to you.
I haven't had that particular problem. I'm not sure if anyone's had trouble getting anyone to invest in AI up there. I haven't had that.
I think I'll comment that, again, back to a CISO strategy. When you're going to your board, you're going to your senior management, you got to leave breadcrumbs. You have to leave kind of what challenges are over the horizon. So if you're starting to talk about this now, you're already 3 years late.
Exactly.
You should be dropping those breadcrumbs. These are the types of capabilities that we need to have on our portfolio over time and be able to execute when the time is right. And then then classic CISO, you use a compromise, some critical event as your moment of punch to your management to say, you know, that 100,000 you gave me last year, well, now I need $500,000. Generally, they're boards and senior management, generally speaking, if you have good management, are afraid to say no. You just have to use that your dial very carefully when it's time to ask for the funds. And you know, I think if an individual's showing up to board or showing up to management saying, "I need $1 million because this is the coolest thing," they shouldn't be in the seat to begin with.
But I hear your point. I face that all the time. One of my colleagues, what he did is he did a cost impact analysis. So he took the events that has happened in the last quarter and the previous quarter and said if the event had happened in a way that there would be a data compromise, then here is the cost impact for IBM as a brand and as well as for my customers. That number is an eye-opener for including the CISOs as well as for the management team where they are investing money on it.
Any additional questions? All right, thank you so much to our panel.